Hi everyone, and welcome to another part of Capablanca's Chess Fundamentals. The customary quote: "It is never too late to be what you might have been." From the English novelist and poet George Eliot. A brief review of the last part, where we discussed the topics endings with one rook and pawns, and a difficult ending, two rooks and pawns. So now, moving further into the book, Capablanca continues the discussion on a difficult ending, two rooks and pawns. He writes, Example 61 from the game Capablanca Janoski, New York National Tournament of 1913. Black's game has the disadvantage of his double c-pawn, which, to make matters worse, he cannot advance because as soon as black plays b6, white replies b4. It is on this fact that white builds his plans. He will stop black's queen's side pawns from advancing and will then bring his own king to e3. Then in due time he will play d4 and finally e5 or g5, thus forcing an exchange of pawns and obtaining in that way a clear passed pawn on the king's file. It will be seen that this plan was carried out during the course of the game, and that white obtained his winning advantage in that way. The play was based throughout on the chance of obtaining a passed pawn on the king's file, with which white expected to win. g4, already preparing to play g5 when the time comes. d6, black wants to play c5, but white of course prevents it. b4 and king b7. This king should come to the king side where the danger lurks. King f2 and b5, with the object of playing king b6 and a5, followed by a takes b4, and thus have an open file for his rook and be able to make a counter demonstration on the queen side in order to stop white's advance on the right. White, however, also prevents this. a4 and rook d4. Of course, if b takes a4, black will have all his pawns on the queen side disrupted and isolated, and white can easily regain the lost pawn by playing either rook on the a file. So rook d4, rook b1 and rook e5. He still wants to play c5, but as it is easy to foresee that white will again prevent it. The next move is really a serious loss of time. Black should bring his king over to the other side immediately. King e3, rook d7 and a5. The first part of white's strategic plan is now accomplished. Black's pawns on the queen side are fixed for all practical purposes. Rook e6. If rook takes f5, g takes f5 would have given white a very powerful center, yet it might have been the best chance for black. So rook e6, rook f1, Rook e7, g5, f takes g5 and rook takes g5. The second part of White's strategical plan is now accomplished. It remains to find out if the advantage obtained is sufficient to win. White not only has a passed pawn, but his king is in a commanding position in the center of the board, ready to support the advance of the white pawns, or if necessary, go to c5, or to move to the right wing in case of danger. Besides, White holds the open foul with one of his rooks. Altogether, White's position is superior and his chances of winning are excellent. Rook h6, Rook g3 and Rook e6. To prevent a d4, Black also fears to keep his rook in front of his two kingside pawns, which he may want to utilize later. h4, g6, Rook g5 and h6. White threatens to play h5, which would finally force Black to take, and then White would double his rooks against the isolated pawn and win it, or tie up Black's rooks completely. The text move, however, only helps White. Therefore, Black had nothing better than to hold tight and wait. Rook e5 would not help much, as White would simply answer Rook f8, Rook e8, Rook takes e5, and whichever rook Black took, White would have an easy game. The student should carefully study these variations. So, h6, Rook g4, Rook g7, d4, King c8, Rook f8 check, and King b7. King d7 would not help much, but since he made the previous move, he should now be consistent and play it. So King b7, e5, g5, King e4, Rook e7, h takes g5, h takes g5, Rook f5, King c8, Rook takes g5, Rook h7, Rook h5, King d7, Rook takes h7, Rook takes h7, Rook f8, Rook h4 check, King d3, Rook h3 check, King d2, c5, b takes c5, Rook a3, and d5, where Black resigned the game. The winning tactics in all these endings have merely consisted in keeping the opponent's rooks tied to the defense of one of or more pawns, leaving my own rooks free for action. This is a general principle which can be equally applied to any part of the game. It means, in general terms, keep freedom of maneuver while hampering your opponent. There is one more thing of great importance, and that is that the winning side has always had a general strategical plan capable of being carried out with the means at his disposal, while often the losing side had no plan at all, but simply moved according to the needs of the moment. Moving further, Capablanca starts the next topic under the heading number 30, Rook, bishop and pawns versus rook, knight and pawns, he writes. We shall now examine an ending of rook, bishop and pawns against rook, knight and pawns, where it will be seen that the rook at times is used in the same way as in the endings already given. Example 62. From the first game of the Lasker Marshall Championship match in 1907. In this position, it is black's move. To a beginner, the position may look like a draw, but the advanced player will realize immediately that there are great possibilities for black to win. Not only because he has the initiative, but because of white's underdeveloped queen side and the fact a bishop in such a position is better than a knight, as previously explained in the book, topic 14. It will take some time for white to bring his rook and knight into the fray, and black can utilize it to obtain an advantage. There are two courses open to him. The most evident and the one that most players would take is to advance the pawn to c5 and c4 immediately in conjunction with the bishop check at a6, and any other move that might be necessary with the black rook. The other and more subtle course was taken by black. It consists in utilizing his rook in the same way as shown in the previous endings, forcing white to defend something all the time, restricting the action of white's knight and white's rook, while at the same time keeping freedom of action for his own rook and bishop. Rook b8. This forces b3, which blocks that square for the white knight. b3 and rook b5, bringing the rook to attack the king side pawns so as to force the king to that side to defend them, and thus indirectly making more secure the position of black's queenside pawns. c4, rook h5, king g1 and c5. Note that the white knight's sphere of action is very limited, and that after knight d2, white's own pawns are in the knight's way. Knight d2, king f7 and rook f1 check. This check accomplishes nothing. It merely drives black's king where it wants to go. Consequently, it is a very bad move. a3 at once was the best move. So rook f1 check, king e7, a3 and rook h6, getting ready to shift the attack to the queen side, where he has the advantage in material and position. h4 and rook a6. Notice how similar are the maneuvers with this rook to those seen in the previous endings. Rook a1 and bishop g4, paralyzing the action of the knight and fixing the whole king side. King f2 and king e6. White cannot answer knight f3 because bishop takes f3 followed by king e5 will win a pawn on account of the check at f6, which cannot be stopped. So king e6, a4, king e5, king g2, rook f6, rook e1, d3, rook f1, and king d4. Now the king attacks white's pawns and all will soon be over. Rook takes f6, g takes f6, king f2 and c6, merely to exhaust white's moves, which will finally force him to move either the king or the knight. a5, a6, knight f1, king takes e4, king e1, bishop e2, knight d2 check, king e3, knight b1, f5, knight d2, h5, knight b1, king f3, knight c3, king takes g3, knight a4, f4, knight takes c5, f3, knight e4 check, and king f4. The quickest way to win. White should resign. Knight d6, c5, b4, c takes b4, c5, b3, knight c4, king g3, knight e3, and b2, where white resigned the game. A very good example of black's part of how to conduct such an ending. Capablanca concludes the chapter here and moves on to chapter 6, further openings and middle games. He begins the chapter with the next topic under the heading number 31, some salient points about pawns. Capablanca writes, before going back to the discussion of openings and middle game positions, it might be well to bear in mind a few facts concerning pawn positions, which will no doubt help to understand certain moves, and sometimes even the object of certain variations in the openings and of some maneuvers in the middle games. Example 63. In the position of the diagram on board, we have an exceedingly bad pawn formation on black's side. Black's c-pawn is altogether backward, and white could, by means of the open foul, concentrate their forces against that weak point. There is also the square at c5, which is controlled by white, and from where a white piece once established could not be dislodged. In order to get rid of it, black would have to exchange it, which is not always an easy matter, and often, when possible, not at all convenient. The same holds true with regards to black's e, f, and g pawns, which create what is called a hole at f6. Such pawn formations invariably lead to disaster and consequently must be avoided. Example 64. In this position, we might say that the white center pawns have the attacking position, while the black center pawns have the defensive position. Such a formation of pawns occurs in the French defense. In such positions, white often attempts by means of f4, f5 to obtain a crushing attack against black's king, which is generally castled on the king's side. To prevent that, and also to assume the initiative or obtain material advantage, black makes a counter demonstration by c5, followed by c takes d4, when white defends the pawn by c3, and the concentrating of black's pieces against the white pawn at d4. This in substance might be said to be a determined attack against white's center in order to paralyze the direct attack of white against black's king. It must be remembered that at the beginning of the book it was stated that control of the center was an essential condition to a successful attack against the king. In an abstract way, we may say that two or more pawns are strongest when they are in the same rank next to one another. Thus, the center pawns are strongest in themselves, so to speak, when placed at e4 and d4, or e5 and d5 for black. Hence, the question of advancing either one or the other to the fifth rank is one that must be most carefully considered. The advance of either pawn often determines the course the game will follow. Another thing to be considered is the matter of one or more passed pawns. When they are isolated either singly or in pairs, we might say that a passed pawn is either very weak or very strong, and that its weakness or strength, whichever happens to be in the case to be considered, increases as it advances, and is at the same time in direct relation to the number of pieces on the board. In this last respect, it might be generally said that a passed pawn increases in strength as the number of pieces on the board diminishes. Having all this clear in mind, we will now revert to the openings and middle game. We will analyze games carefully from beginning to end according to general principles. I shall, whenever possible, use my own games, not because they will better illustrate the point, but because knowing them thoroughly, I shall be able to explain them more authoritatively than the games of others. Alright, we conclude this part of Capablanca's chess fundamentals here, and we shall continue onwards from the next one. Here is a look at the recent channel support. Several new supporters: Nobler 1, Discpersing, bbiswatchinguu, Ratety, Acid Jake, Karpov's Butler, siilarsi, and TFS 20832. Nobler 1 and Acid Jake are fellow chess streamers. I will post a link to their respective Twitch channels in the video description. Do check them out. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Till next time, take care.